Wyoming Territory, August 1881, the wind came hot and dry across the plains, kicking up dust around the train platform at Elk Hollow. And that was when Weston James noticed her small, pale, and alone, clutching a worn carpetbag like it held her whole world. She stood out from the cattlemen and settlers crowded around the depot. Her dress was clean but too thin for the dust, and her boots were city-made, not meant for the cracked land of Wyoming. Her eyes darted over the crowd like she was waiting for someone who had not come. Weston adjusted the brim of his hat and kept his lean frame leaned against a hitching post, watching as she searched the faces around her and slowly wilted with each passing second. No one came for her. The train hissed behind her, then groaned and pulled away, leaving her in its dust. He did not mean to step forward. He truly did not. He had meant to collect his saddlebag from the freight wagon and ride back to his cabin before dusk. But something about her, maybe the tight pull of her shoulders, maybe the way she blinked fast like she would not cry here, not in front of strangers, made him walk to her instead. "You lost?" he asked, voice low and calm. She startled, then looked up, squinting against the sun. Up close, she was even thinner than he thought. Her dress hung off her shoulders like it had been made for someone else. Her cheekbones were sharp, and her skin had the too pale look of someone who had been sick not long ago. "No," she said. "I am not lost. My uncle was supposed to meet me. He owns a ranch near here, the Evers place. Do you know it?" "Evers?" Weston's jaw tensed. "There was an Evers place, burned down last spring, nothing left now but stone and ash." Her lips parted, but no sound came. She swayed a little, and he caught her elbow gently. "You all right?" Her voice cracked. "I do not know." "Name?" he asked softly. Nella Evers." "I am Weston James," he said. "Come on, you need water and shade." "I cannot go with a stranger," she whispered, even as her knees shook. "I ain't asking for anything. I am offering help." She hesitated, then nodded once, slow, as if it cost her something. He helped her to his horse and lifted her up carefully like she might break. She flinched, not from pain, but from the feel of hands. She looked like someone who had learned not to trust touch. They rode 2 miles northeast, where his cabin sat tucked against the edge of a low ridge. It was not much, just one room, a lean-to shelter for the horse, and a well dug by hand years back, but it was solid, clean, and it was his. He helped her down and let her step inside first. She stood in the doorway, staring at the cot in the corner, the table with one chair, the shelf with a tin cup and a Bible. "You live alone?" she asked. "I do." She turned to him. "You do not know me." "No," he said. "But I know what it is to have no one." He gave her the bed and offered her a tin cup of water. She drank like she had not in days. By nightfall, she had not said more than 10 words. She sat by the stove, her hands folded in her lap, eyes distant. He cooked beans and cornbread, slid her a plate. She ate slow, chewing each bite like it might be her last. "Where were you coming from?" he asked finally. "Missouri. My mother died last winter. I was sick. The doctor said I would not last another season there. Consumption? No, fever. But it took most of me with it." She touched her chest lightly. "They said I was too frail for the frontier. My uncle said he would take me in, said I could help with the books, maybe teach his boys. And now," she looked up. "Now I have nothing." Weston leaned back, watching the firelight flicker across her face. "You can stay here, until you figure what comes next. I cannot take your bed. You need it more than I do." She looked down again, and for the first time he saw color in her cheeks. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once. The next morning she was already sweeping the floor when he woke. She had folded his blanket, washed the tin plate, and heated water for coffee. "You do not have to do all that," he said. "I know. But I want to." That day he showed her how to draw water from the well, how to cut kindling, how to keep the stove hot without wasting wood. Her hands trembled at first, but she did not complain. Days passed. She grew steadier. Her cheeks filled out a little. She laughed once, just once, when he spilled flour trying to make biscuits. It was a small sound, but it stuck with him. One afternoon, she was watching the sky while he fixed a fence post. "Do you ever get lonely?" she asked. "Yes," he said, without hesitation. She looked at him. "So do I." He walked to her, wiped sweat from his brow. "You do not have to anymore." Her eyes searched his, and something in her face softened. That night she sat beside him by the fire. Their shoulders touched. She did not move away. I was not supposed to live, she whispered. They said I was too weak, that I would never last out here. You are stronger than they ever gave you credit for, he said. I do not feel strong. You do not have to, you just have to keep standing. She looked at him, really looked. You are the first person who has not tried to fix me. Or pity me, I just see you. She reached out and touched his hand, fingers light but certain. You gave me a life I never dared hope for, she said. He wrapped his hand around hers, slow and warm. And I am not done yet. By September, the wind carried a cooler edge and the light softened earlier each evening, stretching longer shadows across the ridge. Nella had taken to sitting on the porch after the day's work, her hands folded in her lap, watching the horizon with a quietness Weston had come to recognize, not sadness exactly, but the kind of stillness that held too many thoughts. She didn't speak unless she meant it, and he respected that. But sometimes she would glance over at him and he'd see her lips part, as if something was rising to the surface, only to be swallowed back again. That evening, as he sharpened his knife on a whetstone by the porch rail, she finally broke the long silence between them. I had a sweetheart once, she said, eyes on the sky. Before the fever, he paused, the scrape of stone on steel falling quiet. He was a shoemaker's apprentice, liked to whistle while he worked. His hands were always stained with polish, and he had a crooked front tooth that made him look younger than he was. Weston waited. He asked me to marry him in the spring. I said yes. Then I got sick. Her voice thinned. He never came to see me again. My sister told me later he'd taken up with a girl from the church choir. Weston kept his eyes on the knife. You ever wish you'd married him anyway? She shook her head. No, I used to think I did, but now I think I just wish I'd mattered more. You matter, he said, without looking at her. I'm beginning to believe that, she said softly. He set the blade aside and leaned his forearms on his knees. I never courted anyone proper. By the time I had my own land, the war had taken too much out of me. And by the time I felt whole again, most folks I knew had moved on or married. Nella turned toward him, the last light brushing her cheekbone. Did you fight? He gave a small nod. Union cavalry, Missouri border. She didn't ask more than that, and he was grateful. Some things had no words left in them. Instead, she rose to collect the basin from beside the door and carried it to the well. He watched her move steady now, not quick, but sure-footed in a way she hadn't been weeks ago. The sleeves of her blouse were rolled to her elbows, revealing forearms that had begun to tan. She worked with quiet determination, never waiting to be asked, never apologizing for not knowing something, just learning and doing. Later, after the evening meal, Weston brought in a stack of worn books wrapped in canvas and set them on the table. This was my mother's, he said. She taught school on the prairie before she married my father. Thought you might take to them. Nella reached for the top one, its spine soft with use. McGuffey's Fourth Reader, she murmured. I haven't seen one of these in years. You know it. I used to teach the neighbor boys back in Missouri. My mother said if I couldn't do field work, I should shape minds instead. He smiled, faint but real. Reckon you could still teach if you wanted. Out here, closest schoolhouse is 15 miles south. They only open it when enough families send their young ones. But they could use someone like you. Nella traced the edge of the page. I'm not sure I'd know how to start again. You already have. They sat in the low lamplight and she read aloud from the book, her voice gaining strength with each paragraph. He leaned back in his chair and listened, the sound of her words wrapping around the room like something long missing finding its place. When she finished, she closed the book gently and looked across at him. You could build another room, she said. If someone were staying more than a while. I could, he said, holding her gaze. You'd need more wood. There's pine down by the creek if we go before the frost. She looked down, then slowly up again. I know I'm not what most men would want. I can't give you children, not likely. The fever left its mark. He inhaled slowly, then stood and walked to her side of the table. I didn't bring you here expecting anything, he said. But now that you're here, I can't picture the days without you in them. She reached for his hand, her grip firm. I don't want to leave. Then don't. Outside, the wind picked up, brushing through the grass like a hush settling over the land. Inside, they stood in the soft glow of lamplight, close enough for breath to catch between them, the air thick with something unspoken but understood. She rested her head against his chest, and he wrapped his arms around her, slow and certain. They stayed like that until the lamp flickered low, and neither of them said another word. By late October, frost came in the mornings, veiling the grass in white until the sun burned it away. Weston had added a second cot to the far end of the cabin and begun digging the foundation for a side room, not saying much about it, but Nella knew what it meant. It wasn't a question of if she stayed anymore, only how they'd shape the life unfolding between them. She'd begun keeping a ledger of the supplies they used: salt pork, lye soap, lamp oil, her script neat and steady. Weston didn't ask her to do it. She just opened a blank page one morning and began recording, like it was natural to claim a place in the rhythms of the day. One morning he came back from checking the trap line with a torn sleeve and blood drying along his forearm. "You need to sit," she said, already reaching for the clean basin. "It's not bad," he grunted, but sat anyhow when she pressed his shoulder. She cleaned the gash with boiled water and wrapped it in strips torn from an old undershirt. Her hands didn't hesitate, not even when he winced. "You should have let me go with you," she said. "You don't need to be out walking in this cold." "I'm not porcelain," he glanced at her, and something in the way she looked back shut down whatever protest had formed on his tongue. After a moment he said, "Coyote had gotten into the snare, still alive." "I didn't see it soon enough. You kill it," he nodded. "Didn't want it to suffer." She returned the nod slowly. "You're kind, even when it costs you." Weston looked at her, then down at his wrapped arm. "You still want to stay here?" "Through winter, I do." He leaned back against the wall, watching her rinse the basin. "There's a traveling preacher comes through from Rawlins every few months, stays near Flat Rock with the Morrisons when the trail isn't iced over." She stilled. "You mean to marry me?" "I mean, I'd like to." "But not unless you do too." Nella turned, drying her hands on the apron at her waist. "You asking because you think I need protecting? I'm asking because I want to build a life with you, not just share space." She stepped closer, her voice low. "You sure?" "I'm not what most men would call a bargain." "I'm not most men." They held each other's gaze, and in that quiet stretch of heartbeats, something passed between them that had no name but felt like the start of forever. "Then yes," she said, "I'd marry you." They didn't rush it. Weston rode out to Flat Rock days later, returned with word the preacher would pass through before snowfall. In the meantime, Nella pieced together a dress from old muslin and bits of lace she'd kept tucked in her satchel. She borrowed thread from the widow Halstead across the ridge, who never asked questions, and sent her home with a small bouquet of dried wildflowers. The night before the preacher arrived, Weston brought in a box from the lean-to and set it on the table without a word. Inside lay a silver-backed hand mirror, the metal dulled but uncracked. "It was my mother's," he said. "She left it behind when she passed. I kept it, thinking maybe someday." Nella touched the glass, then the worn filigree at the edge. "It's beautiful. I thought you ought to have it." She looked up, tears welling but unshed. "You give everything like it's nothing. I give it because it's yours now." Next morning, the preacher stood by the stone ring at the edge of the ridge, wind tugging at his coat. Nella wore her muslin dress with the dried flowers woven into her braid. Weston stood beside her, freshly shaven and solemn. Their vows were simple. Honest. No one else was there but the two of them, the sky and the land that had nearly taken her and rebuilt him. When it was finished, Weston took her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "You're not too frail," he said. "You're the strongest soul I've ever known." She smiled, not with timidity but with certainty. "They claimed I wouldn't survive. But they didn't know what waited out here." He kissed her then, slow and sure, and the wind quieted around them like it knew. That evening they sat by the hearth, married and wordless, the kind of silence that didn't need filling. Nella leaned into him, her head against his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her like it belonged there. The firelight danced across the floor, and outside the first snow began to fall. The snow deepened over November, muffling the world in a hush that made even the wind seem gentler. Weston hauled wood daily from the tree stand near the creek. the path he carved out slowly tamping into a hard-packed trail. Nella used the hours he was gone to piece together curtains from flour sacks and scrap cloth, stitching by the stove with her knees tucked under a shawl made from wool misses. Halstead had given them as a wedding gift. The new room went up steady, one board at a time, walls sealed against the cold with mud and straw. Weston had offered to build it as a proper bedroom, but Nella had asked for shelves instead, a place to keep her books and papers, a small desk if it could be managed. He added a window on the south wall and carved a narrow ledge beneath it, wide enough for a candle and a cup of tea. One morning she found him standing in the half-finished space, measuring the length of a plank against the wall. "You're doing it left-handed," she said. He didn't look up. "Arms still stiff from where the coyote caught me. Doesn't ache, just doesn't bend all the way yet." "You didn't say." "No need to, it'll mend." She stepped closer, brushing sawdust from his collar. "You'd tell me if something wasn't healing right." He straightened then, not quite meeting her eye. "I would now." She nodded, accepting that. "I've been thinking," she said, "about the families near Flat Rock. Some of them might not have books. I could ride out once the thaw comes and lend what we've got. You'd be comfortable doing that?" "I've been comfortable too long." "I want to be useful." Weston leaned the plank against the wall. "You've always been that." "Not to the world," she said. "Just to you, and I'm grateful for that, but I'd like to give something back further than these walls." He studied her, then gave a faint dip of his chin. "We'll ask around once the road clears. Some of the Morrisons have kin with little ones, might be glad for the help." The next few days brought a string of clear skies. The light off the snow was sharp enough to sting, but it let Weston finish the roof before the next storm rolled in. Nella kept to the hearth, boiling down dried apple slices into preserves, her hair braided close to her scalp to keep it from tangling in the wood smoke. One evening, as Weston came in with the last of the firewood, he found her standing at the window with her hand pressed flat to the glass. "There's a fox out there," she said quietly, "red as rust, just sitting like it's listening." He stepped beside her. "Might have caught our scent. It doesn't look frightened." "They don't always run, not if they're used to quiet." She glanced at him. "I suppose I am too." That night, she took down one of the books he'd brought in weeks ago, one she hadn't touched yet, and opened it across her knees. Her voice caught on the first few lines, but he said nothing, just set another log on the fire and waited. "This one's about a girl who gets sent west in a covered wagon," she said. "She's supposed to marry a man she's never met." "Does she?" "She does, but not because she's told, because he turns out to be patient and kind." He sank into his chair, stretching his legs toward the warmth. "Sounds like a story worth finishing." "I think so," she said through the window, snow falling again, fine and straight, settling like breath over the ridge. Inside, the scent of burning pine, the creak of old wood, the soft rhythm of pages turning. She read late into the evening, Weston listening with his head tilted back, eyes half closed. When her voice faded at the chapter's end, she looked over at him. "You're not asleep." "No," he murmured, "just listening." She closed the book and set it aside. "You never told me what you dreamed of before all this." "I didn't much," he said. Dreaming felt like something for folks with softer lives, and now he turned to her, his eyes steady. "Now I dream of spring. Of planting potatoes and watching you teach some boy how to read his first line without stumbling." "That's not a small dream." "No," he said, "but it's one that fits." She rose and crossed to him, sliding her hands into his. "Then I'll make sure it comes true." Their foreheads touched, breath mingling in the hush between words. The fire cracked low and steady behind them. Outside, the fox moved on. Inside, their life held fast, quiet, and true. By early March, the thaw had begun in earnest. The creek, long silent beneath its crust of ice, whispered again in trickles and rivulets, pushing past the edges of the snowpack. Mud clung to boots and wagon wheels alike, the kind that pulled hard and held fast. But the sun lingered longer now, and the air carried the damp, living scent of earth waking up after sleep. Weston stood at the edge of the field, the one he'd cleared years ago with an axe and a stubborn will, and ran his hand along the top rail of the fence. Beside him, Nella held a folded scrap of paper, a list of seed to trade for when they rode into town. She'd written it the night before, her handwriting tight and slanted, and added 2 more items that morning: chalk and linen thread. "You still set on teaching out past Flat Rock?" Weston asked, eyes on the horizon. "I am," she said. "If they'll have me, they will." She didn't answer, but her mouth curved the way it did when she was holding something close behind her teeth. He liked that about her, that she only spoke what was necessary and always meant it. They rode into Elk Hollow 2 days later, the trail rough in places, but passable. Nella wore her wool shawl stitched with tiny repairs he hadn't seen before, careful mends in the weave that told him she'd spent more than one night by the fire with a needle in hand. Weston drove the wagon steady, nodding to folks he recognized, offering brief greetings without slowing. At the mercantile, Nella stepped inside while Weston loaded feed into the back. When she returned, she held a parcel of wrapped cloth and a small tin canister. "Mrs. Morrison sent these," she said. The parcel's from her eldest. She heard about the school plan and said her youngest can't read a word. She hoped I'd start with him. Weston took the canister from her. "What's this?" "Tea leaves." She said it's a luxury, but every teacher ought to have a proper cup now and then. They rode home under a pale sky, the mountains in the distance softened by rising mist. That night, Nella sat at her desk in the new room, arranging books by subject while Weston repaired the latch on the barn door. When he came in, she was bent over a stack of folded cloth, cutting them into squares with her shears. "What's that for?" he asked. "Writing boards. The children can wet chalk and practice letters." He leaned against the doorway. "You think far ahead?" "I have to," she said. "Planning keeps me steady." He walked to her, brushed a wood shaving from her shoulder. "You're more than steady, you're the heart of this place." She looked up at him, fingers still on the cloth. "I didn't know I could be. You are now." The next week, they made the ride to Flat Rock. The Morrisons had cleared out a back room in their barn, a wide space with a clean floor and enough light to see by. Weston helped hang a chalkboard Nella had traded for with 2 jars of her apple preserves. He stayed long enough to see her unpack her books, then rode back without fanfare, trusting her to find her way. She returned by sundown, cheeks flushed. "They listened," she said, climbing down from the wagon. "Every one of them. Even the boy who tried to hide his paper under his boot." He brushed straw from her skirt. "You're a schoolmarm now." "I suppose I am." By April, the field was ready for planting. Weston turned the soil row by row, and Nella walked behind, dropping seed with care. She'd taken to humming while she worked, not loud, just enough that he caught the tune when the wind stilled. She never did that before the thaw one morning. While she poured water from the kettle into the basin, she paused and looked over her shoulder. "I never asked what you thought about names," she said. He dried his hands on a cloth. "Names for children," he stepped closer, considering. "I'd like to name a girl after your mother." She nodded once, quiet. "And if it's a boy," he smiled, slow and certain, "I'd still name him after her." They didn't speak of it again, but when Weston carved the new cradle pine, sanded smooth, he etched a small wildflower on the headboard, the kind Nella kept near her mirror. By midsummer, the schoolhouse at Flat Rock had grown from a borrowed barn room to a permanent fixture. The men built benches, the women brought baskets of bread. Weston helped raise the walls, drove nails with the others, and watched Nella stand before the room with her spine straight and her shoulders proud. That evening, they stood by the fence again, gazing out over the field where the potato plants bloomed with pale flowers. "This is the life I never thought I'd have," she said. "You built it," Weston said. "I just held the hammer." She leaned into him, her weight warm and certain. "You held me too when no one else would. I'll never stop." That night the wind was warm through the open window. Nella lay curled against him, her hand resting over his heart. Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The quiet between them was full. Years passed and the fields changed with the seasons. Children came one, then two. A girl first, with dark hair and calm eyes, then a boy who laughed before he could walk. Nella taught them letters before they could hold a pencil. Weston carried them on his shoulders through the pasture and built them a swing from a cedar beam. The cabin grew, but not much. just enough for the children's room and a porch wide enough for 2 rocking chairs. They never left the ridge. Some evenings, long after the lamps were out and the children asleep, Weston would wake to find Nella sitting in the doorway, her shawl around her, watching the stars. "You all right?" he'd ask, voice low. "I'm where I'm meant to be," she'd whisper. "I just like to see the sky." And he'd sit beside her, hand in hers, the night stretching quiet and sure before them, the life they built wrapped around them like a second skin. They never needed more.